Welcome to Elders Climate Action, or ECA for short, the home of more than 25,000 elders committed to a nonpartisan effort to mobilize older generations to help end the climate crisis and build a just and sustainable future for our children, our grandchildren, and all life. In collaboration with our climate allies, we advocate for federal, state, and local governments, as well as private institutions and businesses to take actions needed to limit harm to our grandchildren. We are pushing for just, equitable, and effective policies that end carbon extraction and emissions and build a green economy while overcoming systemic injustices wrought by the fossil fuel economy. Some of us are new to climate activism, and some of us have been working for years. But each of us has faced a personal reckoning and decided that there is no better use of our wisdom and our strength, our time, our resources, and our anger and goodwill than to join this struggle. At ECA, we believe that collective action is the most effective way to force policy changes at a scale and timetable necessary to protect all of us. And we mean all of us, in all of our colors, genders, abilities, origins, political persuasions, poor and rich, young and old, and most importantly, our most vulnerable. This summer alone in the United States, we've seen Hurricane Idalia wash away portions of Florida and Georgia and South Carolina. And just a few days earlier, the Western United States was under the deluge of Hurricane Hilary. Fires nearly wiped out entire towns in Maui. Vermont was hit by extreme flooding, and we've seen rising temperatures on land and in the oceans across the globe. In just a moment, you'll hear from a few ECA members discussing important questions like, do elders care about climate change? And why is collective action important? And we'll discuss why and how people are prioritizing action in their elderhood, both in Florida and across the nation. And most importantly, we'll discuss what you and all the elders you know can do to get involved.
I wonder, why do elders care about climate change? We think of this as an issue for young people, but we're very concerned about the well-being of our children, our grandchildren, and all the children who will be coming after them. There are also immediate health threats for elders. I'm a physician, so I think about a lot of these things in terms of their effect on health. The most obvious is heat. Anybody who's lived through this summer is very aware of the problems that we're having with excessive heat all over the country, including in many places where we haven't had that kind of heat before. We think about big storms as being the danger from climate change, and they are dangerous. But more people die from excessive heat each year than die from things like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and all these other very significant and very real threats. Also closely related to climate change is air pollution. We tend to think of those as being two separate problems, but most of what we're seeing from climate change comes from the preparation and the burning of fossil fuels. Most of what we see from air pollution comes from the preparation and burning of fossil fuels. Air pollution isn't as bad as it was when I was a child, but it still kills more people around the world than many, many major causes of death. And air pollution in the United States each year kills more people than die of COVID. We also know that for elders, evacuation is not an easy thing frequently. People are frequently less mobile. They may not have places to go. They may have mobility and disability issues that make that more difficult. So if you need to evacuate because of the threat of a hurricane, because of wildfires, that makes it much more difficult. So it affects human health in many ways, but it also affects the health of our planet. We have lost so many species. Scientists call this the sixth great extinction. The first five were not caused by human beings. We're responsible for this one. That loss of ecosystems, of places that we hold dear to us, of species that we depend on, that causes a lot of strong emotion, a lot of grief, a lot of anxiety for what may happen next. But one of the best ways to deal with the anxiety, to deal with the grief, is to take that as a motivation for action. That there are still so many things that we can do. We may not.
Climate change can seem overwhelming. It's global. And the things causing climate change are embedded in our way of life, our dependence on fossil fuels, our consumerism, our pushing minority groups and the poor into frontline communities heavily exposed to the pollution and other poisons emitted by our fossil fuel plants. It seems overwhelming, and I have to confess, there are moments when I still feel overwhelmed. I know that if we persevere, we can turn things around in time. We have the technologies to fix this, and more are being developed as we speak. What we need is the political and community will to push us through the transition to a new fossil-free economy. And we see the climate movement building every day, from the youth-led groups like 0 Hour and the Sunrise Movement to groups focused on specific changes needed to turn back the global thermostat. We have seen the enormous change that people movements can make. So what gives me hope and what I've learned is that being part of a growing movement focused on the changes we need can work, and we can, by being active, ensure a safe and livable planet.
I'm going to start with two statistics. First statistic is that about 65% of all American voters are over the age of 60. We are the largest voting bloc in the United States. Second statistics, 92% of all Floridians have serious concerns about climate change, according to the September 21 study by the Florida Atlantic University's Climate Resilience Center. So this is something that's really on the minds of Floridians. However, the phrase climate change, which is the root cause of many of the problems that we're experiencing, is pretty much a verboten topic at the top levels of government and other levels of government throughout Florida. When asked about the impact of global warming on the state of Florida, Governor DeSantis, the governor of Florida, said, quote, he won't propose any left-wing stuff to address this situation. DeSantis's position mirrors the work of the fossil fuel industry, which has lied about global warming and climate change for decades. There's a lot of...
It's clear that climate catastrophe is here, and we are left to wonder, what do we do now? Well, more recycling clearly won't cut it. Even all our petitions seem kind of feeble considering the wealth and the power that we're up against. Big oil, big agriculture, and their banking and insurance allies continue to increase their profits, that's our money, as they threaten life on our planet. With their lobbying and advertising, spending our money, and acting collectively, they have convinced many Americans that there's no crisis. They say, we don't need change. They say, just trust us to eventually solve the problem. These are villains, and too many of our political leaders lack the moral courage to stop them. Climate litigation seems promising, but it's slow, and our courts also are not reliable. So if we cannot count on corporate and political leaders or on the courts, if we can't be sure we'll succeed by just mailing it in with our petitions, what do we older Americans have to work with? Well, good news. There are a lot of us, and plenty of us, who are willing to face up to global warming and stop it. We elders have so much more power than we may realize. The silent generation and baby boom generation together make up over 25% of all Americans. Add us to Gen Z and millennials, we will be unstoppable if, and this is a big if, we take collective action. Oh, and older Americans vote. We are the largest US voting bloc. Politicians listen to us if it's another big if, we make clear to them in one voice what we want. So that's where turning out in person matters. We must start showing up all together to put pressure on our elected officials, to join protests, to call out the issues that we're going to vote for, to build our movement by talking about it with everybody. There are studies that confirm a surprising thing called the 3.5% rule. It says movements that engage at least 3.5% of a population have never failed to bring about the change they demand. It may not happen overnight, but it never fails. That's 3.5%. 11 million Americans, our families, our friends and neighbors. We must help them get engaged. Again, the silent generation and baby boomers alone are over 25% of the population. We can beat the 3.5% rule. And the words movement and engaged are key words of the rule. It requires taking action in person as part of a movement. To build this movement, we have to talk about it. A Yale study found that 2 out of 3 Americans say they rarely or never hear anyone talking about climate change in their personal lives. 2 out of 3 Americans. So we must all start now saying we are personally part of the movement to stop global warming. We need to talk to everybody all the time. We need to wear the t-shirts and put up our signs. So yes, we climate people are alarmists. We're also optimistic. Sitting there all alone with worry and fear is really bad for your health. Being part of a movement builds optimism. It's good for you. So how do we get people engaged as climate activists? We say, today, join 2 climate organizations, a local one and a national one like Elders Climate Action. Find them online or just ask around. There are some in every community. Sign up and then show up. No expertise is needed. Whatever skills you bring, you will be welcome. Don't fool yourself that you are not needed. It's all about our numbers and being there in person.
The Florida ECA chapter was started about 5 years ago. We're a small chapter and we have a really huge problem on our hands because Florida is impacted by probably more environmental issues than any state in our country. Most everyone, even if you don't read about environmental issues, are aware of the huge heat dome we've been under. The heat has been rising each year more and more. This year has been particularly extreme. We're dealing with health issues related to the heat, both human health and livestock and agricultural crops. The list really goes on. And unfortunately, sometimes the most vulnerable individuals affected by the heat are the elderly and the young who can't adapt to these changes. Many of these individuals are also living below the poverty line, so there are many environmental justice issues within Florida. In addition to heat, we know about sea rise issues, which are leading to flooding, storm surges, increased extreme weather events, hurricanes. And the ability to deal with this has gone a gamut of natural protections versus man-made ones like seawalls, which have been shown not to be really as effective as the wetlands, as coral reefs, as other ecosystems along the coastline. And speaking of coral reefs, the heat has done a terrible disservice to the marine life that counts on the coral reefs for their survival. They are bleaching, which also affects the tourism and the economy in Florida because of its location, surrounded by so much coastline, and that so many people live on the coastline, affecting property values. Probably you've read and heard about the insurance companies that are no longer even willing to insure properties. Many of them are pulling out of the state of Florida. So
I recently read an article, one of several articles, that the headline was "The Atlantic is on fire," and then subsequently turns out the Gulf of Mexico is on fire too. So we're looking at something like the heat of these waters is above 90 degrees and above. You want to talk about where hurricanes come from? They come from hot water. So the inattention to what's happening to our climate is set up to basically destroy our coasts. How can this be conscionable?
Our ECA chapter in Florida decided that we needed to think about what impact we might have as a relatively small group of people who see the problems in Florida, as elsewhere in the entire world, as being due to the greenhouse gas emissions. And where are these greenhouse gas emissions coming from? They're coming from the fossil fuel industry. We know this, but not everyone does. We decided to look at how the fossil fuel industry is creating tragic consequences in our world. And they are doing this through plastic production. It is their plan B. And people know that the greenhouse gas emissions is what is contributing to our climate crisis. Plastic production is often thought in terms of, or plastics in general, about recycling. And that's important. We can all do things in our individual lives to improve what has been a huge impact on pollution in our world due to plastics. But our chapter decided that a more interesting or more important tactic was to look at the upstream aspect of plastic, its production. And that is where we come back to this notion of what the fossil fuel industry has done to be able to continue to make their profits, and in so doing, continue to make carbon in the atmosphere, methane in the atmosphere, more and more prevalent, and create more and more of a problem in terms of mitigating the climate crisis that we find ourselves in. So we have invited speakers to our chapter meetings to learn more about this plastic production issue, the role of the fossil fuel industry. We have educated ourselves through becoming an affiliate with a group called Beyond Plastics. We have been using this information and writing letters to the editors of our local newspapers, since we are members all across Florida. We have been exchanging emails with our social networks, our friends and family letters, so that we can share with other people what is going on and put the onus on the fossil fuel industry, not on us. We need to make systemic change. Picking up your thermos instead of the plastic water bottle is a great thing for each of us to do, but we need to stay on top of legislation, which is another thing that our chapter does, both the local legislation, state and federal. Right now, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution bill is going to be brought forth in front of the federal government. And we all need to know how we can become familiar with this bill and then contact our local representatives and let them know. Unfortunately, in Florida, as Michael Sales said, we are up against a pretty huge obstacle in that many of our representatives do not agree. And perhaps the people who are in our elected positions can be voted out if they are not doing that which we need to do to finally get a hold of what this fossil fuel industry has done to our world. We know that in Florida, there is an attempt to do adaptation and some resilience measures, but there is no evidence that assessments are being done in order to address the future risks that Florida is going to face. The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, has great benefits for all states. Our chapter was hoping to get involved with an initiative with the AARP in Florida to make sure that individual Floridians know about the benefits that the IRA can provide. It was absolutely devastating news to read that on June 15th, the governor of Florida did a line item veto of 2 items that are going to prevent Florida from receiving about $364 million in federal grants through the IRA because of his vetoing those measures, and in very limited press coverage has indicated no thanks IRA federal funds, to not highlight what has been one of the best environmental legislations that has come through in this last year. So this has been devastating, and it needs to be broadcast more widely so that people know what has happened, and hopefully there is something that still can be done to change that.
When most people think about climate, they don't immediately think about money, but climate and our money are very closely intertwined. The fossil fuel industry uses our money, other people's money, to extract fossil fuels, to refine them, to distribute them, but also to market them and to lobby. Globally, they receive $11 million per minute in government subsidies and tax breaks. If you look just at the US, it's still $20 billion per year. They also get a lot of money in investments. Most of us don't think about ourselves as big investors. Many of us are fortunate enough to have pension funds. Those pension funds are usually professionally managed, so they may not think a whole lot about where that money goes, but a significant portion of that goes into fossil fuel investments. As we deal with climate change, we make the changes we have to make. That's going to take a chunk out of the profits of fossil fuel companies. They may default, they may not be able to deal with their stranded assets, all the things that they built that they can no longer use. That will certainly affect all of our finances, and in particular, those pension funds. So there've been lots of focus now on what can we do about this money. A lot of it has focused on divestment, not investing in those fossil fuels, and hopefully using that money to invest in a new, cleaner, healthier economy. Those investment campaigns have been focused on pension funds, on universities, on foundations, in some places on state and local governments. Now there are over $29 trillion worth of commitments to divest. Not immediately, not tomorrow, so you don't have to worry that the stock market is going to suddenly tumble from that, but gradually over time. There also are significant concerns about insurance rates in many areas of the country. Insurance companies have faced huge losses because of wildfires, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, various extreme weather events. That's been particularly common in Florida. Many insurance companies are pulling out or cutting back, where they're not, the rates may become unaffordable. There are also concerns about property values with sea level rise. There's a lot we can do about the climate, but a certain level of sea level rise is already baked in. So we have to find ways to deal with that, to move people out of harm's way or to adapt on the places that they live, probably some combination. Those things will not be cheap, and we can't expect that homeowners can pay for all of that. So we're going to need taxpayer money to fund that adaptation. Another thing that we have to be concerned about as we look at how our money, how our economy is being affected by climate change.
Age is just a number. Wisdom and gravitas are more important than any number. The Pope, President Biden, Jane Fonda, Willie Nelson, Dolores Huerta, And on the list goes of people in their 60s, their 70s, their 80s, and if you include people like Warren Buffett well into their 90s. Being old doesn't mean you lose your moral compass, doesn't mean that you lose your ability to be compassionate for human beings, other human beings, and for all of nature. In fact, you can increase that compassion as you age. And that compassion can lead you to feel a very strong sense of a duty to future generations. It's a potent force. And even if those of us, as you age, you get physical limitations. But there's still plenty to do. You can vote. You can know where candidates stand. You can know where the issues are. You can know what various legislative proposals that candidates made. You can contact your elected representatives, whether they're at the local level, the state level, the federal level. You can get to know their staff members. You can influence the people that you either vote for or that you vote against. You can testify and make public comments in all kinds of governmental contexts. And you can write letters to the editor of your local newspaper. And you can look at how you feel about social media. And once you get involved with social media, you can be in a position to influence people all over the country and all over the world. You can make a noise complaining about banks and insurance companies and greenwashing corporations that are hindering the transition to a green economy. You can green your personal finances and lifestyle, as Francis was talking about. You can use Inflation Recovery Act incentives to electrify your own personal energy systems and to teach others how to do it as well. You can engage with your local public utility commission to push for their new renewable energy transition plan. One thing I think is really powerful that you can do is you can pick out some specific topic that you want to do research on, that you want to be engaged in. So if you're looking for things to do, join Elders Climate Action at the local and the national level. Florida, we certainly need all of the people who would join in taking action here in this state. Receive our newsletter, get action alerts that tell you things that you can do. They're easy to do. And come to events. Help drive our programming, communications, and actions. Lead the effort to mobilize others. And at a minimum, vote.
Climate change, structural racism, injustice. These are all ugly products of a system that values profit and property over life. And we're working for an equitable reconstruction for all of it. As the largest voting bloc, elders are positioned to help create the political will needed to implement climate policies and solutions while there's still time to avoid catastrophic changes in the Earth's climate. We must take an active stand to overcome misinformation and manipulation produced by the fossil fuel companies and their lobbyists. And we must support our states and our communities and our neighbors in accessing critical funding for climate solutions made available through the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. We must get loud to help mobilize that 3.5% that Nadine talked about and push for additional actions to protect current and future generations. ECA members are building awareness by talking with others in our neighborhoods, our communities, and governments. We're providing comments and testimony on key issues at the local and the national level. We're signing petitions, sending letters, making phone calls, and meeting in person with leaders across the spectrum. We attend town hall meetings, marches, strikes, and protests. We show up. We're bringing our voices together with the youth organizations, grassroots groups, Indigenous peoples, and frontline communities to build political will necessary to combat the climate crisis. Join ECA and we'll provide you with the tools and resources necessary to take climate action from the comfort of your own home and within your own community. The climate solutions needed already exist. It's just we need to support them with our voice, our vote, our dollars, and our actions. Now is not the time to sit back and watch the crisis unfold. It's our responsibility to ensure a healthy and safe future for our grandchildren, their children, and their children's children.
because the statistics indicate that something like 3 out of 4 Americans have never had a personal conversation in everyday life with somebody about climate change. You be that person who talks to everybody else.